Your Honor, please do not send me to prison. I have roamed, but I'm not ruined.
Police officers, once trusted to protect and serve, have broken that trust through actions of corruption, violence, and dishonesty. From Jovanny's tragic incident to Goines' shocking crime, their behavior has deeply affected communities. In this video, we explore these troubling cases and how justice has ultimately been served. Let's begin.
27 years behind bars for an incident that took place back in January of 2019.
On January 28, 2019, Jovanny Crespo, a rookie police officer in Newark, New Jersey, was riding alongside his partner, Eric Ortiz, when a call came in. Be on the lookout for a Chrysler 300. The car had reportedly fled a traffic stop with two armed men inside. What followed was a high-speed chase through Newark, captured on police dashboards and body cameras. During the chase, Crespo jumped out of his patrol car 3 separate times, firing his weapon at the fleeing vehicle. His partner could be heard on the recordings pleading with him to calm down. Tragically, his shot struck both men in the car. Gregory Griffin, the driver, was killed instantly, and the passenger, Andrew Dixon, was critically injured. Crespo later claimed he had seen a gun pointed at him, but other officers argued that the car's tinted windows made this impossible.
I got a split-second decision to make. I didn't see that other vehicle on the other side.
Crespo's actions raised serious questions about the use of deadly force. Prosecutors argued that his response was reckless and unjustifiable, pointing to police guidelines that prohibit shooting at moving vehicles unless there's an immediate threat to life. The weapon allegedly seen in the car was found on the floor and not in use at the time of the shooting. In May 2023, Crespo found himself at the center of a dramatic courtroom trial, facing serious charges of aggravated manslaughter, aggravated assault, and official misconduct. The case gripped everyone who followed it, as two very different narratives unfolded before the jury. On one side, Crespo's defense team argued he acted in self-defense, trying to paint a picture of a man forced into a difficult situation. They claimed his actions were a desperate attempt to protect himself from a perceived threat.
Attorney argued he saved lives that night, with Crespo himself taking the stand in his own defense, maintaining a gun was pointed at him.
But the prosecution had a different story to tell. They insisted there was no real danger at that moment and no reason for Crespo to take the drastic actions he did. They argued that his choices went far beyond what was reasonable or justifiable, causing unnecessary harm. For 6 days, the jury listened, debated, and examined every detail of the case. In the end, their decision was unanimous. Crespo was found guilty on all charges.
The defendant's version of events does not justify his use of deadly force, and that is why he has to continue to add to and change his story as he goes.
The trial's conclusion brought a sense of closure for some and left others reflecting on the weight of decisions made in high-stress situations. It served as a reminder of the importance of accountability and the consequences of our actions. On May 31, 2024, Crespo was sentenced to 27 years in prison. The judge, emphasizing the need to deter excessive force in policing, rejected arguments that Crespo's inexperience excused his behavior, and he shed tears in the courtroom. With good conduct, he may be eligible for parole in 23 years.
The officer was found guilty in July of last year and spoke to the court and apologized to everyone.
In court, Crespo broke down and apologized to the victim's family. He said, "I want to apologize to the victims and my family."
And I did my best.
I would just like to apologize for the event.
Meanwhile, Griffin's son, Ahmad, expressed satisfaction with the verdict, stating, "Justice is served." This case serves as a stark reminder that law enforcement officers are not above accountability. As Essex County Prosecutor Ted Stevens said, there will be ramifications for unjustifiable force. Breaking news! Evil Lives Here now has merch. Support the channel and grab your gear today. Check the link in the description. Jovanny Crespo's actions cost lives, but the next case reveals the horrifying act of killing.
Scott ran. Slager chased him. Scott was unarmed and his back was turned when the cell phone video showed Slager shoot.
On April 4, 2015, Walter Scott, a 50-year-old man, was stopped by police officer Michael Slager in North Charleston, South Carolina. Slager pulled Scott over for a minor issue with a broken brake light. What seemed like a routine traffic stop soon turned into a tragedy that would spark nationwide outrage. During a routine traffic stop, Walter Scott, a middle-aged man, unexpectedly fled from his car. Officer Michael Slager, who had initiated the stop, decided to chase after him. Their encounter turned into a brief physical struggle, during which Slager used his taser in an attempt to subdue Scott. But Walter managed to break free and began running again, trying to put distance between himself and the officer. Instead of continuing the chase or calling for backup, Officer Slager made a life-changing decision. He drew his firearm, aimed, and fired 8 shots. Walter Scott was struck 5 times, mostly in his back. The scene, captured on a bystander's cell phone, later revealed Scott was unarmed and moving away when the shots were fired. Initially, Slager claimed he felt his life was in danger, alleging that Scott had tried to take his taser. However, the video evidence told a different story. This tragic incident sparked national outrage, leading to protests and deeper conversations about the use of force and accountability in law enforcement. The turning point came when a bystander, Faden Santana, came forward with a video that changed everything. Santana had been walking nearby when he noticed the encounter between Walter Scott and Officer Michael Slager. Quietly, he recorded the incident on his phone, not realizing at the time how crucial his footage would become.
That I was going with it to my work. A few seconds later, I saw a second person, an officer, chasing.
The video revealed a heartbreaking truth. It showed Walter Scott unarmed and running away when Slager raised his gun and fired multiple shots. Scott fell to the ground, and the scene grew even more troubling. After the shooting, Slager walked over and appeared to drop his taser near Scott's body. This action seemed to contradict Slager's initial claim that Scott had taken the taser, an account he used to justify the shooting. When Santana released the footage, it spread quickly, igniting a wave of outrage across the country. People were shocked and saddened, demanding answers and justice for Walter Scott. The video became a powerful piece of evidence, sparking conversations about fairness, accountability, and the need for change. Despite the pain, Scott's family urged peaceful action, reminding everyone of the importance of seeking justice through truth and unity.
He will get his just reward. And we have the federal trial and another trial to go.
The video led to a series of investigations by local and federal authorities. Slager was arrested and charged with murder. Although his first trial ended in a mistrial due to a hung jury, he later pleaded guilty to federal civil rights charges. In December 2017, Slager was sentenced to 20 years in federal prison for violating Scott's civil rights, with the court recognizing the killing as second-degree murder.
Judge sentenced Michael Slager to 20 years in prison.
The death of Walter Scott was heartbreaking and a stark reminder of police misconduct. His family devastated. On the other hand, Slager's mother also gets emotional, and during an interview she said, "I hope God takes care of everybody involved, not only in my life, but Scott's family, because I know they're grieving just like I'm grieving."
I just have to let it be and hope God takes care of everybody involved. Not only my family, but the Scott's family, because I know they're grieving just like I'm grieving.
Where Scott's life ended due to cop brutality, the next case shows how corruption sparked a tragic and outrage-filled event.
A Houston police officer is facing a 60-year sentence for killing a couple during a drug raid.
Gerald Goines, on January 28, 2019, a quiet neighborhood in Houston, Texas, became the scene of a tragic and avoidable double murder. Gerald Goines, a 34-year-old veteran of the Houston Police Department, led a narcotics raid on the home of Dennis Tuttle, 59, and Regina Nicholas, 58. Armed with a no-knock warrant, Goines and his team burst into their home without warning, believing it to be a hub for substance dealing. What followed was a deadly confrontation. Gerald Goines, a Houston police officer, led a narcotics raid on the home of Dennis Tuttle, 59, and Regina Nicholas, 58, believing they were involved in substance trafficking. Prosecutors later revealed he had secured a no-knock warrant by lying, claiming an informant had purchased substances from the couple's home, allegedly involving a man with a gun. Based on these false statements, officers stormed the house without warning, and chaos quickly ensued.
It also pointed to anonymous posts and comments online made by OG's former communications director expressing negative opinions about Goines.
During the raid, Dennis and Regina were tragically killed. 4 officers, including Goines, were injured in the ensuing gunfire. When the police searched the home, they found only small amounts of substances, far from the large substance operation Goines had described. It soon became clear that the raid was based on a lie, and that the couple had no involvement in any major substance activity. This devastating incident sparked outrage and raised important questions about the use of no-knock warrants and the accountability of law enforcement. As investigations unfolded, it was revealed that Goines had a history of corruption, leading to the dismissal of many cases. As investigators dug deeper into the tragic raid, they uncovered a disturbing pattern of corruption within Houston's narcotics unit. Gerald Goines, the officer in charge, had a troubling history of wrongful arrests and fabricated cases. His actions had hurt many innocent people, damaging the trust between the community and law enforcement. The investigation revealed that Goines had been involved in several questionable operations during his long career, making it clear that this raid was not an isolated incident. One of the key revelations came from a Texas Ranger who testified that the officers likely triggered Dennis Tuttle to fire his weapon in self-defense. The officers had not announced themselves before entering the home, and the couple, understandably startled and frightened, tried to protect themselves. This violent confrontation, born out of lies and reckless actions, left a community in shock and outrage.
His defense team said despite the fabrication, the couple were drug users, refused to comply with commands, and one of them even reached for an officer's weapon.
The news spread quickly, and many people were heartbroken and angry. The officers' unnecessary violence and deceit left a lasting impact on the families of Dennis and Regina Nicholas, as well as the broader Houston community, calling for changes in police practices and accountability. Goines was arrested and charged with murder. His trial revealed widespread corruption within the narcotics unit, leading to the dismissal of dozens of other cases. In October 2024, Goines was sentenced to 60 years in prison. His conviction served as a stark reminder of the consequences of police misconduct.
Justice is messy. In the end, I have more faith than ever in our justice system.
The case left a deep scar on the Houston community. Dennis and Regina's family, especially Ryan Tuttle, demanded justice and reform. My father and stepmother were good people.
Sure, I'd love for them to be remembered for who they were. They were great people.
The story of a couple shows a devastating loss, but the next case witnesses the fall of a respected sheriff who betrayed his community.
Will spend the next 3 years behind bars. Reeder was charged with several felonies, including theft in office and tampering with evidence.
In 2016, Charles Reeder stood as a beacon of justice in Pike County, Ohio. As sheriff, he gained national recognition during the investigation of the Rodin family murders. But just a few years later, the man once called the people's sheriff found himself in handcuffs, pleading for leniency in a courtroom. His crime? Stealing money seized during arrests and tampering with evidence. Charles Reeder's journey from a well-respected sheriff to a convicted felon is a tale of how poor decisions can unravel a promising career. In 2016, Reeder was hailed as a local hero, leading Pike County through the high-profile investigation of the Rodin family murders. But behind the badge, a troubling secret was brewing. In 2018, an anonymous tip sparked an investigation into Reeder's actions. The allegations were shocking. He had borrowed money from his employees, tampered with evidence, and mismanaged vehicles impounded by his office. It didn't take long for investigators to uncover the truth. Reeder had stolen over $14,000 from evidence bags.
Reeder was originally indicted in June of 2019 on 16 charges after he was accused of keeping money from drug cases in a safe in his office.
When questioned, Reeder insisted he wasn't a thief, but someone who wanted to do good. He claimed the money had been used for charitable acts, like planting memorial trees and supporting community car washes. But prosecutors painted a different picture. They revealed that Reeder was battling a gambling addiction, which led to mounting losses and desperate decisions. Once admired for his dedication to justice, Reeder's actions betrayed the trust of his community. In June 2019, Charles Reeder, once a celebrated sheriff of Pike County, found himself under a harsh spotlight. He was indicted on 18 charges, including theft in office and tampering with evidence. The man who once stood as a symbol of justice was now accused of betraying the very trust his badge represented. By September 2020, Reeder admitted his guilt. As he stood before the judge, his once proud demeanor crumbled. Tears streamed down his face as he pleaded for mercy. "Your Honor," he said, his voice trembling, "I want to see my son graduate from high school. My daughter is getting married in October, so I can be there for her." The courtroom grew silent as Reeder's words hung in the air. Dozens of community members had written letters of support, painting a picture of a man who had lost his way under the immense pressure of his job. But Judge Patricia Cosgrove remained firm. She spoke of the damage Reeder's actions had caused to law enforcement and the people of Pike County. Despite his tearful pleas, she sentenced him to 3 years in prison, ensuring that Reeder would never wear the badge again. Reeder's sentencing marked the end of his law enforcement career. With a felony conviction, he can never serve as a police officer or hold public office again. As he was led away in shackles, the courtroom bore witness to the tragic fall of a man who once held his community's highest trust. Reeder's downfall evokes a mix of emotions: shock, disappointment, and sorrow. His story serves as a reminder of the heavy burden carried by those in positions of authority. While Reeder sought redemption, his betrayal of public trust left a lasting stain on Pike County's law enforcement. His tale is a somber reflection of the consequences of poor choices and the fragility of a once respected legacy. The next case brings us to Ed Saul Mendoza, and his role in the fatal shooting of an unarmed teenager exposed the devastating consequences of misplaced power and judgment.
Turned into a nightmare. Mendoza saying in court today that the remorse he feels every day for TJ's death is a life sentence.
On March 1, 2022, 12-year-old Thomas T.J. Siderio was shot 3 times, dying after a third shot to his back in South Philadelphia. The perpetrator? 26-year-old police officer Ed Saul Mendoza. On the unfortunate day of the shooting, Mendoza and 3 other plainclothes officers were investigating a stolen gun that had been posted on Instagram the week before, and the lead they got had led them to Siderio and a 17-year-old. According to the officers, the 17-year-old in question had stolen the gun and was the one who made the post. However, when Mendoza and the remaining officers tried to talk to Siderio and the other boy, Siderio fired a gun at the officers in the car, causing one of the officers to get broken glass in his eyes. The police officers with Mendoza said the shot came through the back of the car the moment the police lights came on, causing them to argue that Siderio intentionally shot at a police car. Siderio and the other teen ran in different directions, and Mendoza started chasing Siderio. The 12-year-old tossed the gun and started running. During the chase, Mendoza shot at Siderio twice. He shot him before he tossed the gun and after he tossed the gun. Siderio was face down when Mendoza fatally shot him in the back. Siderio was unarmed at the time of the shooting and died immediately.
It is certain that Thomas Siderio, at the time he was shot, was essentially face down.
After the shooting was ruled a homicide, Mendoza was fired and arrested for the murder of Thomas Siderio. Mendoza was charged with first-degree murder, voluntary manslaughter, and possession of an instrument of crime. It was revealed during a lawsuit that Siderio was a foster child and had been moved from his former family 6 months before he was shot. According to prosecutors, Mendoza shot Siderio after it was obvious that he was no longer a threat.
The family of a 12-year-old who was shot and killed by a Philadelphia police officer has filed a lawsuit against the city. Ed Saul Mendoza is charged with murder.
Part of the lawsuit stated that because of Mendoza's misconduct, his family was entitled to compensation from the state. It read, "As a result of the defendant's misconduct, TS's survivors seek compensation for the economic and non-economic losses they have suffered as a result of his death." In April 2024, Mendoza pled guilty to the third-degree murder of Thomas Siderio, and in July 2024, he was sentenced to 8 to 20 years in prison. Before he heard his sentence, Mendoza expressed remorse and said he felt sorrow and regret for murdering Siderio. His attorney spoke for him after the sentencing and said Mendoza claimed he would spend every day he was in prison atoning for his mistakes. Ed Saul Mendoza's tragic decision to shoot and kill based on a perceived threat shocked the public, and the next case bears chilling similarities. In December 2019, 43-year-old Hank Berry was accosted in his home by 4 officers before he was shot in the back. The man who delivered the fatal shot was 35-year-old Alvin Pearson. Pearson and the other officers had responded to Berry's home because of his alleged abuse of the 911 system. According to reports, Berry was concerned about the welfare of his 9-year-old son, who was living with his mother. He found out that his son had gotten a black eye while he was in his mother's custody. However, when the officers pulled up to Berry's house, they had come without a search warrant.
Up the phone from 911.
I do not want to come outside.
Yes, sir.
They're trying to kill me!
Berry refused to come outside of his home when he realized that the officers didn't have a search warrant. He attempted to close the door, but the officers forced their way in and tried to arrest him. Berry became agitated, and as a result, a struggle ensued. Soon enough, Berry got his hands on a taser, and in response, Pearson shot him in the back. Berry passed away minutes later in the living room. Police body cam footage showed the encounter that led to the murder of Berry. Pearson wasn't charged for the murder of Berry until 2021. He was charged with second-degree murder, firearm and assault, voluntary manslaughter, and a misdemeanor charge of illegal entry. The second-degree murder charge was quickly thrown out as Pearson pleaded not guilty. The case went to trial in September 2021, and during the first court session, Henry Berry Jr., the father of the victim, took the stand and gave his impact statement. He believed that his son's murder was avoidable and that it was an unnecessary crime to commit. He said, "My son was a loving child, a very kind person who dedicated his life to raising his son. It was such an unnecessary crime for a telephone call. My son was trying to protect his son from danger, and he lost his life over it."
It was such an unnecessary for a telephone call.
His father taking the stand Friday, saying through tears, Berry was a kind, loving father.
Pearson's lawyer, Tim Clancy, said that Berry was a troubled soul who was paranoid, irritable, and confused. According to Tim Clancy, Pearson didn't have a choice but to shoot Berry. In December 2022, Pearson was sentenced to 11 years in prison for voluntary manslaughter and a misdemeanor charge of illegal entry. However, the sentence ended up being appealed, and Pearson got 5 years of his sentence suspended because of good behavior. Before Pearson was escorted out of the courtroom, he had a few things to say. He expressed remorse for what he did and told the court that it wasn't intentional. He said, "I spent almost all of my adult life serving the Commonwealth. I only want to help. I want Mr. Barry's family to know that I never wanted Mr. Barry to be hurt. I wish I was a better police officer, and I will live with that for the rest of my life."
He had no ill will to towards Mr. Barry, certainly had no malice or malicious thoughts towards Mr. Barry.
Pearson's attorney believed that his sentence should be less because he had no ill will or malice against Barry and should not have been charged with voluntary manslaughter. Alban Pearson's deadly decision rooted in perceived danger is unsettling, but the next case involves an officer whose actions raised questions about accountability in law enforcement. In Chicago, Illinois, Laquan McDonald was shot 16 times by a police officer on October 20th, 2014. The police officer in question was Jason Van Dyke. A few minutes before 10 p.m. that night, police officers were called in to investigate McDonald because there were reports that he was carrying a knife and breaking into trucks around the area. In response to these reports, Jason Van Dyke and 8 other officers went to the area. When the officers confronted 17-year-old McDonald, he used the 3-inch knife he had been carrying to slash the tire of one of the patrol vehicles. He also broke the windshield and began walking away after he did that. He ignored all verbal instructions from the officers to drop the knife. The officers started requesting taser backup, and as they were doing that, Van Dyke started moving toward McDonald. McDonald was walking away from him when he fired the first shot. The 17-year-old spun and fell to the ground. Despite not showing any signs of threat, Van Dyke went on to shoot him 15 more times in under 15 seconds. He used up all of the bullets in his 9mm semi-automatic firearm. According to reports, Van Dyke was not the first officer to arrive at the scene. He had been on the scene for less than 30 seconds and started shooting less than 6 seconds after he came out of his patrol car. The officer who had responded at first said he didn't see the need to use force, and they weren't expecting what Van Dyke did. McDonald was pronounced dead, and at first the murder was ruled a justifiable homicide and within the boundaries of using force. However, dashcam footage discredited the initial police report that had described McDonald as a worse threat than he was. The report described McDonald as crazed, saying that he had lunged at the officers with his knife and attacked them instead of doing what he was commanded. However, reports showed that the knife that McDonald was holding was closed and posed no harm to Van Dyke. In 2015, the dashcam, which had been withheld from the public, was released. It did not contain audio, and this was against policy. However, it was revealed that Van Dyke's dashcam had been intentionally damaged. Reports showed that the microphones were removed and were found in the glove compartment. The family of McDonald got a $5 million settlement, even though the family did not file a wrongful death suit. As it turned out, part of the settlement deal included the condition that the dashcam footage proving that Van Dyke was guilty would not be called into question no matter what. The city of Chicago rejected 15 requests to release the video until Cook County Judge Franklin Valderrama denied the city's request to not release the video showing the murder of Laquan. On November 24th, the video was released. As a result, Van Dyke was charged with first-degree murder, and he immediately turned himself in to authorities. On December 16, 2015, he was indicted on 6 counts of first-degree murder, 16 counts of aggravated battery, and 1 count of official misconduct. This dashcam footage that was released to the public led to protests sparked by the brutal murder of McDonald. They chanted slogans like 16 shots and others to show that Laquan McDonald was another victim of police brutality. The protests went on for months, with many people getting arrested for disrupting public conduct. Eventually, on January 18, 2019, Van Dyke was sentenced to less than 7 years in prison for second-degree murder, instead of what he was actually charged with. What enraged the public even more was that the Illinois Department of Corrections refused to disclose the prison where Van Dyke was incarcerated. As a result, he was moved to the Federal Correctional Institution, where he was soon assaulted by other inmates.
He was released from the downstate Taylorville Correctional Center shortly after the clock struck midnight.
He was moved to another correctional institution, but he was soon released from prison after serving less than 3 years of his sentence. According to reports, he was released on good behavior. On February 3, 2022, Van Dyke was released from prison. Activists were furious to learn that Van Dyke had been released from prison after he got a lesser sentence for brutally murdering McDonald. Many people said that the city didn't care about the rights of black people. After he was released, more protests started, and many court-mandated police reforms were ordered after he was released. If you thought the Jason Van Dyke case was shocking, the story of William Melendez takes it to another level. From excessive force to brutal abuse of power, what happens next will leave you questioning the very people sworn to protect.
They're celebrating after the defendant was beaten and cuffed. The video in the car shows the police officer's fist bump as a celebratory act of bravery.
William Melendez, an officer with the Detroit Police Department, was known among his co-workers as RoboCop for his aggressive policing tactics. On January 28, 2015, William faced controversy when he assaulted Floyd Dent, an African-American man, during a traffic stop. The incident began when William forcibly removed Dent from his vehicle, leading to a violent altercation. During the encounter, William choked and punched Dent several times, leaving him bloody and requiring medical attention. The police department initially accused Floyd Dent of illegal drug possession and resisting arrest. But months later, when the dashcam footage of the incident was released, the truth came to light. William's actions were found to be excessive and illegal. The release of the video led to Melendez's suspension and, ultimately, to his firing. All charges against Floyd Dent were dropped, as he insisted that Melendez planted narcotics on him during the traffic stop. Evidence supports his claims, and the police department's initial allegations were disproved. In November 2015, Melendez was convicted of assault charges with intent to cause great bodily harm, but was acquitted of strangulation. This conviction barred him from ever again being a police officer or owning a firearm. William's actions had serious consequences for his personal and professional life.
Assault with intent to do great bodily harm less than murder, plaintiff Floyd Dent. As to count 3, misconduct in office.
William received a sentence ranging from 13 months to 10 years concerning his assault on Floyd Dent during a traffic stop. In an attempt to mitigate his sentence, William pleaded with the judge, saying he struggled with post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD, as a result of his time in the military and years as a police officer in high-crime areas, and claimed he had no idea why he assaulted Floyd. As William spoke in court, he appeared calm and collected. Although the judge acknowledged that William was a decorated officer, she said his actions were horrible.
I am truly sorry that you believe my actions were unjust. Please have faith in your law enforcement officers.
Blaming post-traumatic stress or denying that you knew the reason or you can't figure out the reason why you beat this man, I think it bodes very poorly for him.
In around 2017, William was up for parole. Several supporters of William wrote letters to the parole board advocating for his release. One letter in particular was written by a retired Detroit police commander, highlighting William's accomplishments and the character of his career as a law enforcement officer. The parole board also reviewed dozens of awards that William had received throughout his career. After considering the various factors, the parole board ultimately agreed to release William Melendez on January 24, 2017. After witnessing William Melendez's abuse of power, the next case brings even more chilling revelations.
But behind the happy facade, Drew was a serial womanizer. He repeatedly left one wife for a younger model, a pattern that led him to murder his third wife, Kathleen, and many believe his fourth wife, Stacy.
After Drew Peterson graduated from high school, he decided to enlist in the Army. During this time, he met his first wife, Carol Brown, and they married. Drew's time in the military came to an end, and he decided to join the Bolingbrook, Illinois Police Department. Drew worked as a patrol officer for several years before being promoted to the narcotics unit. In this role, he became an undercover detective, allowing him to investigate criminal drug-related activities. However, while undercover, Drew's actions led to complications in his personal life. Carol, his first wife, filed for divorce when she discovered that Drew was sleeping with other women during his shifts. In 1982, Drew married his second wife, Victoria Connolly. However, Victoria later revealed that her marriage to Drew was characterized by abuse and control. Drew's behavior became erratic, and he exhibited signs of being mentally unstable. Around the same time, Drew found himself under investigation by his superiors at the Bolingbrook Police Department. The accusations against him centered around his failure to report bribes he had received while undercover. This breach of trust eventually resulted in his being fired from his job. However, Drew was not deterred. He applied for reemployment and was ultimately rehired, albeit at a lower rank. The added stress of the ongoing investigation took a toll on his marriage to Victoria. In 1992, Drew divorced his second wife, Victoria. 2 months after their divorce, he married Kathleen Savio. However, this marriage did not last, and Drew and Kathleen separated in 2001. According to Kathleen's loved ones, she experienced a significant transformation throughout her marriage to Drew. They believed that Drew's controlling personality had a stifling effect on her. As time went on, the relationship between Drew and Kathleen deteriorated significantly. In 2002, Kathleen obtained an order of protection against Drew, alleging domestic violence. 1 year later, the couple officially divorced, and at that time, Drew was already pursuing a relationship with his future fourth wife, Stacy. When Drew met Stacy, she was a teenager working a night shift at a hotel. Drew and Kathleen's relationship remained contentious, as they frequently had to exchange custody of their children. Between 2002 and 2004, there were 18 domestic violence reports filed by Kathleen against Drew. The last weekend in February 2024, Drew had custody of his and Kathleen's children. However, when he went to return them that Sunday, no one was there. On Monday, March 1st, Drew asked Kathleen's neighbors to accompany him into her house to check on her, as no one had heard from her for a few days. When they entered, the neighbors and Drew made a horrifying discovery. Kathleen was found in the dry tub, unconscious, and had a large wound on her head. It was evident that she was dead. Following the initial autopsy, the medical examiner determined that the manner of death was accidental. However, those familiar with Kathleen had suspicions about her ex-husband, Drew. According to Stacy, Drew's fourth wife, Drew was with her at the time of the incident. Stacy stated that they had spent the night together, providing Drew with an alibi for the time of Kathleen's death. Over the years, Stacy and Drew had children of their own. However, in October 2007, Stacy failed to show up for a project that her sister had assigned her. This behavior was uncharacteristic of Stacy, as she was a devoted mother and would never leave her children behind. As a result, her sister filed a missing person report with the police on October 29th. When questioned about Stacy's whereabouts, Drew claimed she had left him for another man. This statement did not sit right with those who knew Stacy. As suspicion fell on Drew for Stacy's disappearance, the detectives decided to delve into his past and investigate the death of his third wife, Kathleen Savio. This investigation ultimately led to the exhumation of Kathleen's body and the determination that she died by homicide. In 2009, Drew was arrested and charged with murdering Kathleen, and his trial began in September 2012. He was found guilty of the crime and was sentenced to 38 years in prison. When the judge announced the sentence, Peterson erupted in anger, screaming, "I did not kill Kathleen." Kathleen Savio's sister shouted back at him, "Yes, you did, you liar." The outburst escalated into a heated exchange, and the judge ordered Stacy Peterson to be removed from the courtroom.
Peterson yelled out in court, "I did not kill Kathleen."
Several years later, in 2016, Drew received another 40-year sentence for attempting to arrange a hit on the life of the state attorney who tried his case. To this day, Drew still maintains his innocence from behind bars. Stacy's whereabouts remain unknown, and Drew remains the prime suspect in her disappearance. Drew Peterson's disturbing history of manipulation and violence left a trail of unanswered questions, but the next case takes a darker turn.
This interrogation room interview is dated February 13th, 2023. Searchers found Susana Morales' remains just days earlier near Highway 316. At one point, investigators tell Bryant they found his gun.
In February of 2023, 23-year-old Doraville police officer Miles Bryant was arrested and charged with multiple offenses in relation to the death of 16-year-old Susana Morales. Susana, who had disappeared the previous July, had sent a text message to her mother indicating that she was on her way home. However, she never arrived at her destination, and her remains were later discovered in a wooded area off Georgia Highway 316. Officers conducted a thorough search of the area where Susana's body was located. During this search, they discovered a loaded Glock pistol. The firearm was registered to Miles Bryant, but he had reported it stolen the day after Susana disappeared. However, it was later revealed that Miles had asked a detective not to investigate the theft of the firearm. This request raised suspicion among investigators, prompting them to examine the location data from Miles' phone. Analysis of the location data revealed that the phone had been in the wooded area where Susana's body was located around 1 a.m. the night Susana went missing. This discovery provided significant evidence linking Miles to Susana's disappearance and death. The detectives conducted an interview with Miles Bryant, but he claimed he had no idea who Susana Morales was and had nothing to do with her disappearance. Despite his denials, the evidence suggested otherwise, and Miles was taken into custody. A motion was filed to introduce evidence indicating that Miles Bryant had allegedly kidnapped and killed Susana Morales to fulfill a sexual urge. The motion also stated that Miles had reportedly used his position as a police officer to go through people's phones he arrested or encountered during his shifts, and then sent that private media, usually sexual photos, to himself. There was also mention of 4 other times when Miles Bryant exhibited deviant behavior. In 2018, a 16-year-old girl named Susana experienced an unfortunate incident in which her underpants were repeatedly stolen by an individual named Miles Bryant. However, Susana decided not to file a police report due to the advice of another officer. This officer reassured Susana that Miles had a promising career in the military, and that involving the police and filing charges could potentially ruin it. Fast forward to 2024, when Miles Bryant found himself on trial for Susana's murder. The trial resulted in Miles being found guilty and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Before receiving his sentence, Miles had the opportunity to address the court and express remorse.
I just want to apologize to everybody and to the victim's family.
The next case brings us to Eric DeValcanier, a former police detective whose decision to use deadly force against an unarmed man sparked outrage.
Eric DeValcanier is not Derek Chauvin, who murdered George Floyd. Eric DeValcanier is not one of the 3 men in Georgia convicted of running down and murdering Ahmaud Arbery.
A single gunshot echoes through a Kansas City backyard. In seconds, a life is snuffed out. But this isn't your typical crime scene. The man holding the smoking gun? A decorated police detective. The victim? An unarmed civilian. What happens when the thin blue line shatters and a cop becomes the killer? Today, we dive deep into the case that rocked Kansas City and sparked a national debate on police accountability. December 3rd, 2019. A quiet neighborhood in Kansas City, Missouri. The air is crisp, and the streets are calm, but that calm is about to be shattered. Detective Eric DeValcanier and his partner are in hot pursuit of a red pickup truck. The driver, Cameron Lamb, pulls into his own backyard. What happens next will change lives forever and ignite a firestorm of controversy. DeValcanier claims he saw Lamb point a gun at his partner.
Pulling up to defendant's house, Sergeant Schwam pulling into the driveway, immediately getting out with his weapon drawn, rapidly moving into the backyard carport garage area of the house, and defendant doing the same.
In a split-second decision, he fires. 2 shots ring out, cutting through the winter air. Lamb slumps over the steering wheel, fatally wounded. But as investigators comb the scene, questions start to pile up. Where's the gun Lamb had allegedly pointed? The crime scene tells a different story than the one DeValcanier is spinning. Let's rewind a bit. Who was Cameron Lamb? A 26-year-old father of 3, Lamb was known to his friends and family as a devoted dad who loved working on cars. He had his struggles, sure, but who doesn't? On that fateful day, he was just pulling into his own backyard. Now, he'll never walk out of it again. And DeValcanier? A seasoned detective with years on the force, decorated, respected, trusted to uphold the law. But on that December day, did he cross a line that can never be uncrossed? Months pass, investigations are conducted. Finally, in June 2020, DeValcanier was charged with involuntary manslaughter and armed criminal action. It's a rare move. Police officers are seldom charged for on-duty shootings. The thin blue line holds firm, usually, but not this time. Fast forward to November 2021. The courtroom is packed, tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Judge J. Dale Youngs delivers his verdict. DeValcanier is found guilty on both counts. The judge's words cut through the silence. It's a bombshell. A serving police officer convicted for an on-duty shooting.
Where a police officer has been charged, convicted, and sentenced for killing one of his citizens that he's supposed to protect and serve.
But this isn't the end. It's just the beginning of a new chapter in this twisted tale. March 4th, 2022. Sentencing day. The air is electric with anticipation. Lamb's family fills one side of the courtroom. Their faces a mix of grief and hope for justice. On the other side, DeValcanier's supporters, including fellow officers, sit in stoic silence. As DeValcanier sits before the judge, his face is a mask of composure, but beneath that calm exterior, what thoughts race through his mind? Is he replaying that fateful day in December? The sound of the gunshots? The sight of Lamb slumped over the wheel? Or is he already imagining the long years ahead, trapped behind bars, a cop among cons? Judge Youngs doesn't mince words. He sentences DeValcanier to 3 years for involuntary manslaughter and 6 years for armed criminal action. The sentences will run consecutively.
Eric DeValconaire, on count 1, the Class E felony of involuntary manslaughter in the second degree, I sentence you to a term of incarceration in the Missouri Division of Adult Institutions of 3 years. On the unclassified felony of armed criminal action, I sentence you to a term of incarceration of 6 years.
But wait, there's more. In a twist that sends shockwaves through the room, Judge Young suspends the execution of the sentence. Instead, he placed DeValconaire on probation for 3 years. The fallen detective avoids prison time, for now. The room explodes in chaos. What just happened?
A date for sentencing will be determined after further consultation with counsel. The court will order the preparation of a sentencing assessment report. If the defendant chooses to file a motion for new trial, his deadline for doing so is extended 10 days. I will order the defendant remain free on bond pending sentencing. That will be the court's order. Counsel will withdraw their exhibits. Eric DeValconaire is not Derek Chauvin, who murdered George Floyd. Eric DeValconaire is not one of the 3 men in Georgia convicted of running down and murdering Ahmaud Arbery.
The reaction is immediate and intense. Lamb's family is stunned, their hopes for justice dashed in an instant. They'd hoped for a harsher sentence, a clear message that no one is above the law. Lori Bay, Lamb's mother, speaks outside the courthouse, her voice trembling with emotion.
This has been just a hurtful tragedy for our family, and the healing is just not there yet.
On the other side, DeValconaire supporters breathe a collective sigh of relief. To them, he's a dedicated officer who made a split-second decision in a high-pressure situation. They argue that the punishment doesn't fit the circumstances. He was just doing his job. As DeValconaire leaves the courthouse, a free man for now, the debate rages on. His case becomes a lightning rod for discussions about power and justice in America. Some see it as a rare instance of a police officer being held accountable. Others view it as an overcorrection, a sacrificial lamb to appease public anger. But amidst the heated arguments and media frenzy, let's not forget the human cost. Cameron Lamb, a 26-year-old father of 3, will never return home. His children will grow up without their father. His mother will never hear his laugh again. And Eric DeValconaire, once a respected detective, now bears the weight of a man's death on his conscience. The case raises difficult questions. How can we ensure that police officers can do their jobs effectively while also protecting citizens from excessive force? And when tragedy strikes, how do we determine a just punishment? Police departments across the country are watching closely, reevaluating their use of force policies. Activists are using the case as a rallying cry for further reforms. And what of DeValconaire himself? As he begins his probation, he's a man caught between two worlds. No longer a cop, not quite a convict. His career in law enforcement is over, his reputation in tatters. But he's not behind bars. Is this justice? The answer depends on who you ask. The case also shines a spotlight on the role of police unions. Throughout the trial and sentencing, the local police union stood firmly behind DeValconaire. As the dust settles on this explosive case, questions linger. Will DeValconaire's probation stand, or will he eventually serve time? How will this verdict impact policing in Kansas City and beyond? And in the end, can justice ever truly be served when a life is lost? Eric DeValconaire's tragic misuse of authority left a family grieving, but the next case delves into corruption on an entirely different scale.
Joseph Miedzianowski. What is perhaps most chilling about Miedzianowski's story is the duality of his life. He wasn't just a corrupt cop, he was living a double life, both personally and professionally.
In December 1998, the arrest of Joseph Miedzianowski, a 22-year-old veteran of the Chicago Police Department, shocked the community. Joseph, 45 years old at the time, was arrested as he reported to work with the gang crime unit. According to the prosecutors, Joseph ran a drug ring that distributed millions of dollars worth of narcotics between Chicago and Miami between 1995 and 1998. The prosecutors alleged that Joseph served as a middleman in deals, brokering connections between feuding dealers. However, his involvement went beyond mere brokering. According to the prosecutors, Joseph eventually took control of the daily operations of the operation, overseeing all aspects of the business. One of the allegations against Joseph was that he pocketed $22,000 per month from the dealers. This money, the prosecutors said, was used to pay off police officers, to throw investigators off Joseph's trail. Additionally, Joseph was accused of providing stolen guns and ammunition obtained from the Cook County Sheriff's Department's shooting range to known criminals. After Joseph's arrest, his attorney spoke to the media and denied the allegations. The attorney argued that despite the recorded conversation between Joseph and the dealers, it was all part of an undercover operation that Joseph was working on. According to his attorney, the charges against Joseph were a mere fairy tale concocted by the Bureau. They argued that the FBI had selectively pieced together fragments of conversations that, when taken out of context, sounded bad. However, when considered as a whole, the message communicated by Joseph was entirely innocent. The prosecutors maintained that Joseph's actions betrayed his sworn duty to protect and serve the community. Joseph adamantly denied any wrongdoing during his trial in 2001. He testified that he was an honest, hardworking officer that dedicated his life to serving and protecting the community. He claimed that he took down some of the most dangerous drug lords operating on the streets of Chicago, making a significant impact on reducing crime in the city. Despite his claims, the jury was not swayed by Joseph's testimony. They found him guilty on all counts, sentencing him to life in prison without parole, plus an additional 5 years of imprisonment. At his sentencing hearing, the judge admonished Joseph, stating that he had failed in his duties as a police officer and had not served and protected the citizens he was sworn to protect. Instead, he had been protecting the dealers. In 2021, Joseph, now 68, sought to reduce his sentence under the First Steps Act. However, Joseph's bid was met with disappointment as a federal district judge denied the motion, citing Joseph's double life and the damage he had caused to those around him. Joseph's story is a cautionary tale about the dire consequences of corruption within the police force. As an officer, he had the power to make life-altering decisions, but instead, he chose to abuse that power for personal gain. While Joseph Metzanowski earned the title of most corrupt cop, his crimes didn't involve children. Dennis Perkins and his ex-wife Cynthia, however, crossed that unforgivable line.
He was a deputy with the Livingston Parish Sheriff's Office who was raping children. His wife was a school teacher. He was ejaculating on pastries. She was serving them to her class.
In October 2019, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children received an anonymous tip that implicated Dennis Perkins, a Livingston Parish Sheriff deputy, in possessing explicit images of a child. This tip set off a 5-year investigation, culminating in Dennis's eventual arrest and the discovery of a vast trove of evidence against him and his wife, Cynthia. When the detectives questioned Dennis, he refused to disclose any details and immediately requested an attorney. Frustrated by his silence, the detectives informed Dennis that they had a warrant for his arrest and that he had been fired from his job at the Livingston Parish Sheriff's Department. Dennis's wife, Cynthia, was arrested alongside him. Crime scene investigators seized the couple's electronic devices from their home, and a thorough examination revealed a mountain of evidence against the couple. One particularly damning piece of evidence was video footage depicting him assaulting an unconscious woman. In addition to assaulting women, Dennis also engaged in inappropriate behavior while on duty. The prosecutors discovered multiple videos that depicted him having intercourse with women suspects on the side of the road, to blackmail these women into those acts under threats that he could make life hard for them if they refused. Dennis's abuse of power and manipulation of vulnerable individuals are truly reprehensible. However, the most disturbing aspect of the case against Dennis is the revelation that investigators uncovered 60 images of a child under the age of 13. It became apparent to detectives that these photos were taken with hidden cameras around Dennis Perkins' home, including his bathroom. Furthermore, investigators discovered an image of a man they believed to be Dennis leaving his DNA behind on small cakes. It was later found that his wife's 7th grade class consumed the cakes. In total, Dennis's victims included 2 children, 2 adults, and a dog. Dennis and Cynthia Perkins faced a staggering 150 felony charges. Cynthia filed for divorce from Dennis shortly after their arrests, claiming she was afraid of him. As the case moved forward, the prosecution quickly realized it would be a lengthy and emotionally challenging trial for everyone involved.
We felt satisfied that this accomplished justice and we were able to get a win without putting the victims and this entire community through the rigors of that trial that was going to happen next week.
Cynthia pleaded guilty to reduced charges and was sentenced to 41 years in prison. On the other hand, Dennis pleaded guilty to all charges and was sentenced to 100 years in prison. During Dennis's sentencing hearing, he took a moment to address his victims and apologize for his actions. He stated that he hoped that those who had suffered as a result of his abuse could find forgiveness and healing through Jesus Christ.
So at the end of the day, she does admit she had some part to play in this.
Absolutely.
One woman had the opportunity to give a victim impact statement during the hearing. She called Dennis sick and said his actions were deplorable, expressing her relief that he would be out of power and unable to harm others. The woman expressed her satisfaction that he would be spending the rest of his days behind bars, adding in a sarcastic tone that she sincerely hoped he would have a nice life in prison. Dennis Perkins committed unspeakable crimes, but he didn't take a life. The same can't be said for these corrupt Atlanta officers, whose actions led to the tragic death of an unarmed 92-year-old woman in 2006. On November 21, 2006, in Atlanta, Georgia, a group of police officers led by officers Jason Smith, Greg Jr., and Arthur Tesler arrived at the home of a 92-year-old woman named Katherine Johnson. The officers, dressed in bulletproof vests and equipped with riot shields, approached Johnson's residence with a no-knock warrant. As they made entry into the home, the officers announced their presence before stepping inside. Inside was Katherine Johnson, who had an old, rusty revolver for self-defense since she lived in a rough part of the city and had recently installed extra locks on her door. Upon hearing the officers announce themselves, Katherine fired the weapon in the direction of the officers. Katherine's bullet didn't strike any of the officers, but the incident sparked a chaotic exchange. In the moments that followed, officers Jason Smith, Greg Jr., and Arthur Tesler fired at Katherine Johnson a total of 39 shots. At least 5 of those shots struck the older woman, ultimately causing her to lose her life. The officers arrested Johnson as she was dying in her living room, and she was pronounced deceased by paramedics at the scene. The tragic shooting of Katherine Johnson sparked outrage and debate in the community, highlighting the ongoing tensions between the police and citizens. It was later revealed that Jason Smith had planted 3 bags of cannabis in Katherine Johnson's home. According to court reports, the 3 officers conspired to create a false story to deceive homicide detectives. In October 2008, all 3 ex-officers pleaded guilty to conspiracy to violate civil rights resulting in death, as well as charges related to manslaughter, voluntary manslaughter, and perjury. The officers testified that at the time of the shooting, they were under a lot of pressure from their superiors within the Atlanta Police Department, which led them to fabricate evidence and lie. They claimed that they were not properly trained to handle the situation. On February 24, 2009, former officer Greg Jr. was sentenced to 6 years in prison, Jason Smith to 10 years, and Arthur Tesler to 5 years. They were also each ordered to pay $8,180, which was the cost of Katherine Johnson's funeral expenses. The Atlanta Police Department implemented several changes in the aftermath of Katherine Johnson's death. The police department made adjustments to its policies and training protocols, aiming to prevent similar incidents from occurring in the future. Specifically to the narcotics team. Additionally, all former members of the narcotics unit were replaced, indicating a commitment to rebuild the team with officers who demonstrate integrity and uphold ethical standards. Furthermore, the shooting of Katherine Johnson brought the issue of no-knock warrants to the forefront of the public consciousness. The purpose of a no-knock warrant is to prevent offenders from having time to destroy evidence, but the tragic incident highlighted the potential for unintended consequences. As a result, the Senate voted to tighten restrictions to make it harder to obtain warrants. This change in legislation aimed to strike a balance between the need for effective law enforcement and the safeguarding of innocent lives. Our next case shifts to Aaron Dean, a former police officer whose split-second decision to shoot an innocent woman through her window during a welfare check left a community in shock and a family devastated.
Would we want more time? Yes. Yes, we would. But that's what the jury decided, and, we're going to have to, take that with us. 11 years, that's the same age as Zion. 10 months, 12 days. That's the day that it happened.
Outside, Aaron Dean, a police officer, responds to a neighbor's call about an open front door. The neighbor, James Smith, had called a non-emergency police number, concerned because he noticed Jefferson's doors were open and lights were on at an unusual hour.
Neighbor James Smith called the non-emergency police line around 2 in the morning when he noticed the home's front and side doors were open with the lights on.
Dean arrives at the scene with his partner. Instead of knocking on the front door or announcing their presence, they begin to check the perimeter of the house. This decision would prove fatal. As Dean moves around the house, he spots movement through a window. In a split second, he draws his weapon and fires a single shot. The bullet pierces through the window, striking Tatiana Jefferson in the chest. She falls to the ground, dying in front of her young nephew. The aftermath is chaos. Dean's body camera footage reveals the crucial moments. He never identifies himself as a police officer. The entire encounter, from Dean seeing movement to firing his weapon, lasts a mere 3 seconds. Immediately after the shooting, Dean resigns from the Fort Worth Police Department. 2 days later, he's arrested and charged with murder. The case sends shockwaves through the community and ignites nationwide discussions about police use of force and racial bias in law enforcement. As more details emerge, the complexity of the case deepens. Investigators find a gun near Tatiana's body. Her family later confirms she owned the weapon legally and kept it for protection. This detail becomes a pivotal point in the upcoming trial. The case also brings attention to Dean's background. Records show he had been on the force for only 18 months. During his police academy training, he had received an unsatisfactory evaluation that noted his tunnel vision and need for improvement in stress reactions.
During the hiring process, also during that training in 2018, a supervising sergeant stated that when Dean was asked something by his training officer that he, quote, continues to avoid or ignore what's being said or asked.
In the weeks following the shooting, protests erupted across Fort Worth. Activists demand justice for Tatiana, holding vigils and marches. The case becomes a rallying cry in the broader movement against police brutality and racial injustice. The Jefferson family files a wrongful death lawsuit against the city and Dean. They argue that the Fort Worth Police Department's policies and training were inadequate, contributing to Tatiana's death. As the case moves towards trial, legal experts debate the charges. Some argue that murder is appropriate given Dean's actions. Others contend that manslaughter might be more fitting, considering the split-second nature of the decision. The trial is delayed multiple times, first due to the COVID-19 pandemic, and then because of various legal motions. Each delay adds to the tension and anticipation surrounding the case. Finally, in December 2022, more than 3 years after the shooting, Aaron Dean faces trial. The courtroom is packed as the proceedings begin, with observers eager to see how this high-profile case would unfold. Fast forward to December 2022. The tension in the air is thick as Aaron Dean finally faces trial. The prosecution paints a picture of a trigger-happy cop who acted recklessly. They argue that Dean failed to follow proper police procedure, resulting in an unnecessary death. But the defense attorney has a different story. They claim Dean acted in self-defense, believing that Tatiana was armed and posed a threat. They argue that in the heat of the moment, Dean made a split-second decision to protect himself and his partner. As the trial unfolds, shocking details emerge. Body cam footage shows Dean peering through the window, shouting, "Put your hands up, show me your hands," before firing, all in a matter of seconds. "Put your hands up, show me your hands!" The jury watches in stunned silence as the events of that fateful night play out before their eyes. Witnesses take the stand, each adding another piece to the puzzle. Dean's former police academy instructor testifies that Dean's actions were out of line with his training. He states emphatically that officers are taught to announce their presence when conducting a wellness check. But perhaps the most heart-wrenching testimony comes from Zion Carr, Tatiana's nephew. Now 11 years old, he recounts the terrifying moments when his aunt was shot. His words paint a vivid picture of a fun night turned tragic in an instant.
She didn't point it out, she just kept it next to her, on her side.
And where did she go with that, after she picked up the gun?
She was about to start walking to the window. I didn't hear nothing after that, I just seen her fell on the floor.
As the trial progresses, the courtroom becomes a battleground of emotions. Tatiana's family sits stoically, their pain evident in every line of their faces. Dean, on the other hand, remains impassive, his expression unreadable as he listens to the testimony against him. The prosecution hammers home their point. Dean's actions were not just a mistake, but a criminal act. They argue that his failure to identify himself as police and his quick decision to shoot were grossly negligent. The defense counters, reminding the jury of the split-second decisions officers must make in potentially dangerous situations. They argue that Dean believed he was facing an armed suspect and acted to protect himself and others. After days of testimony, it's time for closing arguments. The air in the courtroom is electric as both sides make their final plea to the jury. The prosecution urges them to hold Dean accountable, to show that no one, not even a police officer, is above the law. The defense implores them to consider the pressures and dangers of police work, asking for understanding and leniency. As the jury files out to deliberate, you can hear a pin drop in the courtroom. Hours tick by, stretching into days. The wait is excruciating for both sides. Finally, after 3 days of deliberation, the jury reached a verdict. The courtroom holds its collective breath as the judge asks Dean to stand. The tension is noticeable as the verdict is read. In a moment that would echo across the nation,
Aaron York deemed guilty beyond a reasonable doubt of the offense of manslaughter, assessed his punishment at confinement in the Texas Department of Criminal Justice for 11 years, 10 months, 12 days.
The actions of these officers shattered lives and communities, leaving a lasting impact that can never be undone. Their courtroom reactions only highlighted the magnitude of their betrayal. But the story doesn't end here. The next video on your screen dives even deeper into more shocking cases and the sentences that stunned the world. Keep watching.